G'day, Ben from Melbourne here, and today I'd like to talk about some of my favourite Australian music from the 1970s. So let's start in 1973 with the Coloured Balls album, Ball Power, led by Australian guitar god Lobby Lloyd. To me, this is an early example of Australian proto-punk, with its hard-driving rhythms, Lobby Lloyd's blistering guitar work, and raw vocal style. This was definitely an influence on the punk scene that was to emerge in the next few years. This is a fantastic early 70s Australian hard rock album. Next up, Melbourne's own Skyhooks with their debut album from 1974, Living in the 70's. Now this was said to be the album that legitimised Australian songwriters to be able to sing about Australian things. That's not to say that this is some navel-gazing, introspective singer-songwriter project. This is in fact a really great fun rock record with great guitar playing, fantastic drumming, Shirley Strawn's helium-like vocals, poking fun at the Australian lifestyle, very irreverent. Quite a few of these songs got banned on Australian FM radio, which of course only made them more popular. Thoroughly enjoyable record. Skyhooks, Living in the 70's. Next up, one of the albums that stand head and shoulders above all others in my opinion, The Saints' I'm Stranded. This, to me, is the pinnacle of punk. I think that these guys should be mentioned in the same breath as The Clash, the Sex Pistols, and the Damned. They're every bit as innovative as shown by each of their successive albums. This just for the track Nights in Venice, which closes the record alone. Ed Cooper's guitar work will just blow your head off. It would have been amazing to see this live. If you don't own this album, stop this video, run down to your record store and buy this now. Next up, some more punk rock, but a more Detroit-influenced punk rock from Radio Birdman, featuring Detroit-born Dennis Tech, who I'm sure had his eyes wide open as he was growing up listening to the Stooges and the MC5. Moved to Australia as a medical student. I think it was Pip Hoyle, the keyboardist he hooked up with, and Rob Younger, who was, you can tell already, he was a devoted fan to Iggy Pop if you've ever seen any footage of Radio Birdman live. Fantastic record. This is the Australian version. You may be familiar with this cover if you own this. This one has the well-known single Aloha Stephen Dano on there, but you know, songs like Do the Pop, New Race, all classic cuts. Radio Birdman, you know, them and the Saints, probably the two most important bands in Australian punk rock history. Next, let's move over to Perth with their punk scene. Dave Faulkner led the Victims. Of course, Dave Faulkner would become better known as the lead singer and guitarist for Hoodoo Gurus in the 80s. But this is where he started, with James Baker on drums, who seemed to play on every album of that era in the punk rock scene, whether it be with the Victims, the Scientists, the very first Hoodoo Gurus album, and of course the Beasts of Bourbon. Just for the song Television Attic alone, it's worth picking up this album. It also features a ton of B-sides on the second side of this, because of course punk rock records were short and fast, so the reissues can add a little bit of depth to also give you an idea of what was going on. The Victims. Next up, Rose Tattoo. Now this is more of that traditional Australian hard rock, first perfected by Bon Scott era AC/DC. Rose Tattoo were also on the Albert's label. This is like down and dirty rock. Also, it was the band that introduced the great slide guitar work from Pete Wells and some of the early songs on this album were written by Ian Ryland, who would go on to form the awesome Australian punk band X. But by the time this come out, he was already gone. And of course, Angry Anderson on lead vocals. Rose Tattoo, also probably known, unfortunately, in my humble opinion, more for the pretty tepid cover by Guns N' Roses of Nice Boys Don't Play Rock and Roll. But don't shoot me down, that's just my opinion. This is way better. Alright, just a quick look at a few other ones I'd like to mention, much more obscure stuff. This is Voit 456. I think that's spelled Voigt 456. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but whatever. This is a great compilation of their stuff from 78 to 79. I think it includes their one and only full-length album as well. Very much in the post-punk vein, with their very angular guitar sound, keyboards, but probably not as precise as like your bands like Wire. They're a bit more off-kilter and all over the joint, but really great record. And also another compilation by the Metronomes. This is more of an electronic post-punk sound, drum machine, keyboard driven, no guitars, not a lot of vocals, some female vocals, but really interesting stuff. And two compilations I'd like to highlight. These were both put together by Mikey Young. This is Follow the Sun, and they're both, this one is, hits that never were. This is music that was kind of aiming for a hit song in Australia in the early 70s, but kind of, I guess in the same vein as those soft pop nuggets series and things like that. Fantastic stuff, and even though apparently they were looking for mainstream success at the time, it come out wonderfully weird. I really enjoyed this one, and the follow-up one that he put together called Sad About These Times, which I love the description, is by singer-songwriters with a tear in their eye and a feather in their hat. I think that tells you all you need to know about this compilation, again by Mikey Young. And just quickly to wind up, just want to show a few late 70s punk rock and post-punk new wave singles. So, of course, aforementioned Radio Birdman, Aloha, Steve and Dano. The Victims EP with the tastefully titled EP No Thanks to the Human Turd. The first version of The Scientists, very embryonic, with the single Frantic Romantic, of course. Where is he? There's James Baker yet again. If you're familiar with the mid-80s Scientists, this is completely different. It's much more that bubblegum, catchy punk. Great stuff though. Queensland band Razor. This is obviously a reaction against the Bjelke-Petersen rule of Queensland at the time. The titles say it all: Stamp Out Disco and Task Force. I think I've shown this one before. The Psychosurgeons with the fantastic horizontal action, Wild Weekend. Members of this would later on go on and form the Lipstick Killers. More of that kind of like really hard industrial electronic kind of thing from the Primitive Calculators, Do That Dance. And we'll finish off with Goodbye Spaghetti Punks by the Flying Calvitos. Again, this is like a keyboard, drum machine driven post-punk, new wave kind of thing. Really worth checking out as well. So that's just a small selection of some of my favourite stuff from the 70s. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.